Obviously, everything is not completely hunky-dory. We have to look at what challenges Paris Agreement faces in terms of getting it into practice to develop cooperation and leading to collaborations, which typically indicate sustained activities. So as we already saw a little bit, biggest emitters are not at all on track to meet their goals. In fact, US is woefully inadequate even for a 4°C world. So 1.5 and 2°C require massive changes and socio-technical transformations of its energy system, transportation, building, heating, etc., renewables. Indicators and verification processes are obviously needed. It's very nice to say, yes, everybody is going to submit a plan and they're going to say, we did this, we did that. So accounting we will become very important, as we will see. Transparency in NDCs is missing. So countries presented a plan, but what kind of monitoring and external verification will be needed, and what are the assumptions involved? When you say you will reduce your emission intensity by your emission intensity of GDP by a certain percentage, or carbon intensity of your energy by a certain percentage, they require certain transparency for scientific tracking and verification. That is not very well wired into the agreement as it stands. Voluntary mutual verification may work, and the example we will see here is between US and China. So US and China under G20, I think, agreed to do mutual peer review of their fossil fuel subsidies, right? All countries, as we saw in a previous chapter, are offering fossil fuel subsidies, which basically means what you're paying at the pump is actually less than the actual cost from production, transportation, and delivering at the pump. So with public assessment of each other's 15.42 billion and 8.2 billion respectively in subsidies, China and US take a big step on transparency, but inch forward on reform. So here is Obama and Xi Jinping enjoying a nice drink. Obviously, that was the time when relations were obviously in a much different plane than they have gotten into in the last 4 years since Trump took over. Is that a negotiation tactic? Is it working? It's not clear yet, but since a new president is taking over, obviously it'll change again. So what are the long background calculations that go on between the two countries in terms of mutual trust and mutual verification? That's not always clear from media reports, but nonetheless, let's hope everything is going in the right direction. So here is a little bit about measuring, reporting, and verification from the Climate and Development Knowledge Network. So it obviously considers governance, mitigation, adaptation, and finance of implementing Paris Agreement, with keys provided here for link with adaptation, link with mitigation, link with governance, and link with finance. So those are the colors seen here. So this is kind of where we want to go, from starting with establishing institutional arrangements, as we said, for measuring, reporting, and verification. Assess data needs and gaps to actually do these verifications. Design an MRV system, which is this measuring, reporting, verification system. The data management, if you try to do all the emissions and the footprints and the activities in mitigation, governance, and adaptation, and so on, afforestation, for example, what is the data management involved? Is it going to be drones, satellites, all together, and so on? Build MRV capacity. So how will all the poor countries that have committed to Paris Agreement and the nationally determined contributions actually do MRV. They may need help. To build capacity for MRV is needed as well, and improve the system over time. So countries will resubmit and update their NDCs. They will learn their lessons, and they will improve the system of NDCs commitments as well as the MRV system. That's the plan anyways. So the other details are hidden a little bit. This is something called embodied carbon. So if you look at so you're showing here again annual CO2 emissions in gigaton carbon per year. We keep using slightly different units, but it's okay. You should be comfortable changing the units. Basically million ton CO2 equivalent or carbon or CO2 gigatons, etc., etc. They're all related by a factor. Okay. Highly industrialized countries, upper middle income countries, low middle income countries, and lowest income countries, basically showing the difference between consumption based annual emissions versus territory based emissions. Okay, so this is for upper middle income countries, and this is for lower middle income countries, and the lowest income countries are of course way down here. So the difference in the attribution principle of consumption based versus territory based basically means when you consume something, you have to do some kind of a life cycle analysis to account for the carbon emitted at source. When you import a product, whether it's food or vehicle or PPEs, toys, cars, whatever, right? They are associated with certain emission where they are produced. So you can see that this switches here for highly industrialized countries. They are either net importing or net exporting. So that switches this which one is higher. So if they are manufacturing and importing, then their consumption based footprint will be higher, whereas upper middle income countries are net export countries where their territory based footprint will be higher, whereas their consumption based footprint will be lower, and that's the same for low middle income countries. Basically means rich countries are importing things from poor countries which are manufacturing them. So you are increasing your emission because you're manufacturing things, but you're actually embodying that carbon into the products you are exporting. What you're consuming is actually less than what you're emitting if the accounting is done for embodied carbon. It matters because you are really getting into verification of emissions. Then these things have to be accounted for. Okay. Paris Agreement is an experimental experiment in governance where each country can report their experience to help others on how to improve their NDCs. Okay, so that's a good idea. But in the meantime, as we see again and again, the emissions keep increasing and we are on a business as usual trajectory. So decarbonization is needed. This means not tinkering with efficiencies to lower emissions, but to actually decarbonize the system. Of course, it also means emitting carbon but taking out equal or more amount of carbon from the atmosphere. It's not like emission of carbon will go to zero, but the system will become completely decarbonized so that individuals don't have to worry about every little thing. How much meat did I consume, whether I'm driving an SUV or how much am I traveling, and so on and so forth. The system needs a change. So that, according to this alternate energy magazine, is accomplishable by electricity mix, biomass supply and use, carbon capture and sequestration, which is basically going to become inevitable. There is no way we are going to meet any goals without coming up with some carbon capture and sequestration technology transformation. Fuel switching, like gasoline to hydrogen, fuel types, liquid fuels to electricity, and electricity balancing. How much storage is needed to balance electricity supply and demand? What is the technology mix? So each one has a question here, and that's what is needed for decarbonization. Looking again at the annual greenhouse gas emissions in gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent again. This is from our world in data. Each pathway comes with uncertainty marked by shading from low to high emissions under each scenario. Okay, so we are going, if we want to really remain in the 1.5 degree pathways, then we should have already started going in the direction of reducing total emissions. We are up here now at 50 gigatons CO2 equivalent, so you have to be careful of the units. That has to start dropping right away. So decarbonization is a serious business. If you are going to be in these trajectories, then your current policies are going to take you to 2.8 to 3.2, and pledges and targets under Paris Agreement will only get you 2.5 to 2.8. So we are clearly blowing past 1.5 and 2 degrees C, and with no climate policies we're going to get up here. Again, remember, these temperature targets are associated with probabilities, and they are not very well defined in terms of how long we can exceed them, or whether that itself becomes a game, saying, okay, we'll exceed for 1 year and we'll try to come back, and whether we will be able to come back, and so on. So complicated business, but they give you a sense of thresholds that are dangerous.